Not only do I believe I'm the most conservative candidate in this race, and one that will and has demonstrated time and again to stand up to the establishment and prepared to go back there and do that with natural alliances. I'm the only one in the race that's got the endorsement of a sitting U.S. Senator and Tommy Tuberville and, with Kerry Lake. And I've been back there. I have a great relationship with Mike Lee. I've met with many other senators, Rand Paul, Eric Schmidt, J.D. Vance, all these folks, Rick Scott, I've had conversations with. So there's a good core group of America First, true conservative senators and senatorial candidates that I'm prepared to go back there and align myself with right away with a President Trump in office and go save this country.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning into the 435 podcast. I'm your host, Robert Macfarlane, and I have Jeff Watkins riding shotgun again with me today. Our interview today was with current Riverton Mayor Trent Staggs, and he's running for the U.S. Senate seat that's being vacated by Mitt Romney. We were able to cover a wide range of issues on this episode. We tackled the budget. We tackled the Department of Defense, term limits, all of his perspectives on a conservative viewpoint. We think you're going to enjoy this episode. You're definitely going to get an idea for who Trent Staggs is, why he thinks you should vote for him. If you want more information beyond this podcast to dive a little bit deeper, big shout out to Michelle Tanner and her podcast. She interviews him months ago on the Michelle Tanner podcast, but you also can go to trentstaggs.com and find his full writings on every single topic and issue. He has a contract with Utah and his perspective on this is what he's going to promise the people of Utah while he is in the Senate seat, which I think is a smart idea, and you can take a look at that at trentstaggs.com. So we hope you enjoy this episode. We hope you get some value out of it. Make sure you hit like and subscribe. Enjoy this one, guys. We'll see you out there. Thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging with me.
Great to be here.
You got a big day. You got a lot going on.
There's a lot going on.
And it has been you've been in this race for the better part of almost 2 full years or a year and a half. Is that right?
About 9 months now.
9 months?
We announced 8-9 months. Yeah, we announced in May. We were the first ones that fully announced we were in the race. The only ones to really challenge Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
And we've done it from day one.
Because he was, and then I saw him vote for that appropriation bill just yesterday. Was it yesterday? He voted to send more money to Ukraine and Israel with no border, nothing. And
yeah, remarkable.
It's remarkable. I could not believe it. I actually thought, I was like, there's no way this is true. This didn't actually happen. This is an X.com fake story. It wasn't.
No.
It was unfortunately.
Unfortunately, that's been par for the course for Mitt Romney. He hasn't been, I think, representing the state of Utah than, better part of the time he's been in office.
Yeah.
And so that's a big reason why I decided to run. It wasn't just his policy differences, but it's just the way in which he's been representing. But we have a lot of those too.
Yeah. Well, maybe help me. Let's just start from when you jumped into politics. So you built a business, you launched it onto the NASDAQ. It's an energy company. Maybe right. Help me just summarize that piece for anybody who doesn't know you. Maybe a quick background. Maybe a 1 minute brief.
So I consider myself a lifelong Utahn, grew up kind of elementary school years in Orem, then moved up to South Jordan area, Bingham High School graduate, undergrad at the U of U, political science, economics, and then got my master's in business from BYU.
Okay.
Operated several companies, worked at Morgan Stanley, some of my own entities as well, been very entrepreneurial, and then helped consult several companies over the last decade or so, and then usually maintained a board seat. And that was an energy company, Vivicor, that we took public, listed on NASDAQ back in February of 22. And so I've always taken that kind of business approach, entrepreneurial approach to municipal government. Mm-hmm. And about 10 years ago, back in 2013 is when I ran for city council, served a 4-year term. And then I'm in my 7th year now as mayor of Riverton, which is, in southern part of Salt Lake County, about 50,000 residents. I think we're top 19. We're the 19th or 20th most populous city in the state of Utah, and have really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Because I was born up in Sandy, And Riverton was like the outskirts. Like if you lived in Riverton, it was like you probably had cows or something. And that's not the case anymore.
Not the case anymore. Yeah, no. When I attended Bingham High School, that was maybe 10,000 in population.
Yeah.
And now we're 50,000. And that's what I've explained. Salt Lake County has really become this county of wall-to-wall cities, and where we used to have these natural buffers in between communities, right, where guys would go out, we'd go hunting, whatever. I mean, it's just homes now. It's homes and businesses.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because that's kind of how the world has become. I graduated from Cal State Fullerton in 2009, and one of my undergrad classes was specifically around globalization, and Thomas Friedman wrote a book called The World is Flat, and I think it was 05 or 06, and then he revised it a couple of times, but it was this the internet and the age of global trade had really like launched into this new era that had never been seen before, right? We didn't, this ability to connect and buy products directly from a foreign country, sitting in your home in Riverton, right? Like it just had never been before seen. So it was like, how are we going to adjust the political, the economic, like all these different pieces, and how the world's become, flat. That's kind of how the cities have become in Salt Lake, that historically you had these individual identities, and now they're kind of all blending together, right?
To some extent they are. I mean, what we've tried to do though in Riverton is maintain that sense of community.
Yeah.
And, I
tough.
lead out with a citizen survey every 2 years, and that's the number one thing they like, is that sense of community. So although we are a suburb of Salt Lake City, we still have that somewhat, rural feel almost, because especially the eastern part of our city is very, we've got a lot of estate lots, horse property, but then the western side of our city is more dense, and quite a bit of development there. But we've been able to do that through our events and other things that I think we've done a great job as a community. Yeah,
it's not an easy thing to do. So for the amount of time that you spent in that local government arena, and this is a shout out to Michelle Tanner's podcast. I listened to that one ahead of just trying to prepare to understand kind of who you are and who you what you're running on. But that's a great podcast where she goes through some really specific items and asks you some specific questions on individual topics. But the one thing that jumped out to me is that at that local level, because I feel the same way, is that politics should be local heavy, and the federal government should be this tail end of all these, it's the sweep up items, right? It's protecting the borders, defense, right? How do we manage these interstate commerce, things like that, right? Where the federal government's just knocking on our individual door at this point. So that bridging that gap, I think this is a good jump. For me, it makes sense. Somebody who understands local government in a small community as it's grown to that U.S. Senate, like that voice, to me I think that's really powerful.
I think it's a perspective that is not, unfortunately, not widely held in Washington, D.C. And that's what I've been saying. And Michelle, yes, she's fantastic. She gets it also in St. George, being on the city council, to understand the importance of local governance. And that's what our founders envisioned. Yeah. They wanted government closest to the people. They knew that that's what governed best. And in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, they delineate, right? We, the people, have delineated. These are the roles, responsibilities of the federal government. Unfortunately, the federal government has grown so much larger than our founders ever envisioned. They're failing to do those few things delineated in the Constitution. And border security is, case in point. That's what's happening right now. They're completely failing on that front because they're doing far too much. And I've got a history of that. I tell folks that I'm not just pushing back for 10, now going on 11 years in local government. I've been pushing up against federal, state, and county overreach. And I've been on the forefront of pushing back and understand federalism, understand that proper role of government, that kind of perspective, local government going to DC where I've got to balance my budget, for the last 10 years running my community, had to balance the budget, innovate to try to drive down the cost of government. I've done it time and time again. We got out of a countywide police department to our own local police department that saves tens of millions of dollars in property taxes for our residents and has provided better service. So that and animal control, a fire district, every time we've done that, I've taken our community out of if you will, a higher layer of governmental service where service was being provided. It's just bizarre how it's always ended up being less expensive and we provided a higher level of service.
Yeah. It's interesting, like zero-based budgeting, right? If you just start with what's the priority, what's the role of what the city government should be doing, allocate the revenues coming in on what's needed to provide those things, fire, police, right? These essential items. And then now we get into these priority lists that kind of taper off, and it becomes really a gray area because self-interest is drives these communities, and depending on who is the loudest voice in the room can dictate where money goes to. So having somebody that can sit back in a pragmatic way, I think it's super important. So tell me, as from your perspective, going back to that budget being this key piece, and this is something I've had a hard time getting somebody to give me, explain to me how that balanced budget, what does that actually look like at the federal level? What is it? Maybe help me understand your perspective on where would we start with that zero base? Where are the priorities?
Yeah. Well, and this is, on my website, I say that as your senator, I'll focus on three things: smaller government, safer families, and a stronger economy. And smaller government to me is absolutely number one because we are doing far too much. I'm in this race. You see a picture there, my 14-year-old son, 11-year-old daughter.
Nice.
I've said time and again, it's the height of immorality to have placed $34 trillion in debt on those two and on successive generations. Something has to be done. I have committed. I've signed a contract with Utah that I will push for a balanced budget amendment, and I will never vote for an omnibus spending bill. There's continuing resolutions where, Senator Lee, I've had a lot of conversations with him about this. He calls it the firm, where you've got leadership on the House and Senate side that they'll cobble a bill together. They'll in private negotiate this for months and then slap it on the desk of members of Congress and say, you've got 48 hours to pass this or the government's going to shut down and it'll be your fault.
Yeah.
That's terrible. What we need to do is get back, to answer your question, to the budgetary process. Back in 1974, we passed the Congressional Budget Act. And in that time, in 50 years, we've passed a budget on time 4 times.
Wow.
It's remarkable. And we haven't had a balanced budget since 2001. The last several years, it's been these continuing resolutions. We just keep lumping more and more trillions and trillions in debt on top of us. So that 1974 Act, what it said is, look, we've got 12 appropriations subcommittees. Defense, for example, is one of them, right? Each one of these subcommittees is supposed to be producing their own budget. There's supposed to be ample opportunity for debate and amendment, right? And so it's very
within the subcommittee too,
yes,
right? Within that committee,
each one produces a budget.
Yeah.
And then you come out with your final budget, which is the combination of the culmination of all 12 of those. We're not doing that today. And we've got to get back to budgetary order. And if that means I don't vote for a continuing resolution and the government has to shut down for a time, so be it.
Yeah.
And that's been the position of Senator Lee as well. And I think that's what we have to do.
Because life will go on. If the government shuts down, not really a whole lot changes. Now, for people that are in the military or they're, specifically invested, their job is within the government, which is a massive portion of the U.S. population. Yeah, that's tough for those people that have chosen that. But that's the risk you take by joining the company or the firm of the government and saying, well, if my business can't get their poop in a group, right? Walmart's got to do it, or their employees go out of business, right?
And what you find in these governmental shutdowns is they often get prioritized, right? So members of the military, Social Security benefits, other things, they continue to be paid. And I really think, though, that we need to have that type of backbone.
Yeah.
And that's how I've characterized this race. I said, look, I'm from Utah. We've got other people in this race that understand Utah and can go back there and advocate for our state. What we need more than anything right now, though, is somebody who has demonstrated the backbone and the resolve to stand up to the establishment.
Yeah.
And I'm the only one in this race that's done that time and time again. I was the only one to challenge Mitt Romney. I was out there in May before he decided not to seek re-election. He went from 50 down to 30% in terms of favorability in the time that we announced, and went out and did 50 plus town halls. My video there, my launch video, had over 1 million views on Twitter. We were on national media as a result, got the endorsements of Mark Levin, Charlie Kirk, Kerry Lake, Senator Tommy Tuberville now, many, many people, over 100 local elected officials here. So we were gaining a lot of attention and calling out Romney's record. But I was the first to endorse President Trump last summer, well before anybody else in this race had. I've always stood up to mask mandates and vaccine mandates. That's very well documented on my website. There's a page called Proven Fighter. And it has all the media links where I did that. I mean, from day one, from March of 2020, I called out the county when they unconstitutionally tried to limit gatherings to no more than 10 people, or they would slap individuals with a Class B misdemeanor. I said, whoa, we're not going to enforce this in Riverton. We're not prosecuting. And then in June of 20, when they did the same thing with masks, KUTV came out and interviewed me, and I said, nope, this is heavy-handed. I'm not going to enforce it. And so mask mandates, standing up to ESG, standing up to high-density housing, which we've got, unfortunately, a very developer-led state legislature here that's trying to impose their will on cities all across our state. I've stood up for life and passing resolutions against, in support of human life back in 2019, stood up against inappropriate materials in school at Jordan School District that meets in my community, in my city, with other state representatives that are pushing out legislation that says you can't have these materials in school libraries. There's no educational value whatsoever. I called out Utah as a sanctuary state. ICE had actually designated Utah back in May as a sanctuary state. So time and time again, I've demonstrated that ability to stand up, push back on the establishment, cut taxes in my community, innovate to lower the cost of government, understand through that local perspective, federalism and the proper role. That's what we need. I'm tried. I'm proven. That's what I've been telling folks.
What do you think? Why do man, I like everything you're saying. There's nothing I don't agree with. I think this is the exact. I worry because it's exactly what I want to hear. So whenever whenever it's like, wait, this sounds too good to be true, I know there's like a wait, but what's this other story? What am I missing, right? And I think a lot of people are that way. But what do you think it is that politicians in general, what is it about the fact that they'll campaign on one thing and when they show up they do something completely different? What do you think that it is that causes? Because I have a hard time. I have a hard time believing that their heart wasn't in the right place to begin with. In some cases, you could tell you're like, this is a self-interested individual, especially when you talk to him for an hour, like you get into him face to face, you could tell where you're like, there's a stage here and then this is the real person over here. Yeah. But what do you think it is about the system? Like why do you think that happens over and over and over again?
Well, what is the expression? They say that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And sadly, our system is, I think, it's designed in such a way that people, the majority of people, are interested in self-preservation, right? That's what made George Washington and some of our founders so unique. He didn't care. And that's one of the things that I have in my city council chambers. I have a copy of our Constitution on one side of the dais, our oath of office on the other, to remind all of us what we've committed to obey, support, and defend. And then
in simple terms too. Like these are really simple, clear terms. Yes. That's one of the things that just blows my mind is like, this is not complex. Like we've made so many things complex. Sorry, I interrupted, but go ahead.
Well, and then there's one of my favorite images and paintings is that of George Washington resigning his commission. Right? He's at the Maryland State House and the Revolutionary War is over. And he goes back and resigns his commission and says, I'm going to return back to civil life, indicating that our government is unique, that we are, it's the civil power that is superior to that of the military power. And King George, remember, he said he could have been the most powerful man on earth. Yeah. But that's, unfortunately, far too few politicians have that type of constitution. We need to elect those types of individuals that have that courage to say, no, we're a citizen-led government. We're going to do this for a short time, and then we move on. And that's why in my contract with Utah, I talked about a balanced budget and also not voting for omnibus spending. I've also advocated for term limits. I've signed a term limit pledge. I'm self-imposing one on my own, in Riverton, for example. This is something that I believe in. We need people that will go back there, represent us. And that's what I've been saying is that sadly, Tucker Carlson wrote a book entitled Ship of Fools back in 2018. And I said, we've been led by a ship of fools for far too long. They care more about ingratiating themselves with power and maintenance of their own power and enriching themselves through insider trading. That's another one of my points in my contract with Utah, to ban the trading of individual stocks. We've got members of one in this race in particular that is always, if you go to unusualwells.com, you can see their performance versus that of the S&P 500. It's crazy. That has to stop. We need to stop having people like that elected in office, and we need people that will actually go there and represent the people and care more about we the people than themselves.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And there's this financial carrot that it gets dangled in this political sphere that it's almost impossible to ignore. I've been asking most people this question lately, but have you ever read or heard of the book The Creature from Jekyll Island?
Oh yeah, G. Edward Griffin.
G. Edward Griffin. And if you've listened to my podcast before, you've heard me talk about it before. But I think this is the amount of people that have no idea and understanding about the federal government or the Fed, the Federal Reserve, and its creation and history of money, right, and how it influences. And this comes back to the conversation that Putin just had with Tucker. Is that he talks about this, the media and the financial institutions, and how there's a clear line of who's in control, right? And it's weird when somebody from the outside that I don't agree with in so many different ways, that's clearly a man that's self-interested and brutal in so many ways, but he shines this light on, like, everybody else sees this, but why doesn't the American people see this? And we have this electable ability to elect people in that won't follow this track, but we get sucked into this typical, voting for the establishment candidate. Do you think that there's something with, and I know this is a difficult question to ask when you're running on a party ticket, right? Mm-hmm. Do you think it has something to do with we're a single party state? Do you think it has something to do with the power within the Republican Party here in Utah? At least just if we're just to say our political setup, is there a piece that's broken within the party system here in Utah that's not is self-balancing to where this establishment group can kind of keep fostering this establishment politician?
I don't think it's unique to a party. I mean, I'm a Republican for a reason. I believe in the party platform, right? Believe in our Constitution. That is the preeminent, supreme document. But my priorities and my beliefs align with that of the party platform. I think that we get too many people that become Republicans in name only here in the state because they know how dominant the Republican Party is, that we don't have very, competitive general elections. And so they will say, well, that's the party I need to be a part of. And so they come in and they
say the things.
They say the things that people want to hear. And they get behind establishment players, establishment donors.
I've heard people that are really smart, right? That in so many ways are just brilliant. And they'll say, but I don't want to bet on the one that loses. Like, they don't want to vote for the one that is going to lose. They want to be able to vote for the one that wins, right? So they're like, well, what do the polls say? I was like, it doesn't matter what the polls say. What is the person? Why are you voting for that person? And these are really smart people, but this is like a common way that people vote. And I don't understand it.
Me neither.
Have you seen that too? Is that just me?
Yeah, I have. And you see kind of that dichotomy exist amongst the caucus convention system and then maybe a primary vote. The people, I believe in the caucus convention system. I'm going uniquely through that. Others in this race are gathering signatures.
You're not gathering signatures?
Not at all.
Interesting.
I committed day one that this is the path we're going to take. This is the Mike Lee way. This is the way. The caucus convention system, I think, is divine. This is something where the more informed people are making that decision. I trust the delegates. And
this is the Federalist Papers, right? This is the reason why we're not direct democracy, why we're a republic. Yep, exactly.
And so that's but at the same time, we've gone out there with all the national endorsements that we receive. We've received in our campaign $1 million or more. So we're viable. Not only do I believe I'm the most conservative candidate in this race, and one that will and has demonstrated time and again to stand up to the establishment and prepared to go back there and do that. with natural alliances. I'm the only one in the race that's got the endorsement of a sitting U.S. Senator and Tommy Tuberville and, with Kerry Lake. And I've been back there. I have a great relationship with Mike Lee. I've met with many other senators, Rand Paul, Eric Schmidt, J.D. Vance, all these folks, Rick Scott, I've had conversations with. So there's a good core group of America First, true conservative senators and senatorial candidates that I'm prepared to go back there and align myself with right away with a President Trump in office and go save this country.
Yeah.
Right? So not only do I believe I'm the most conservative and the one that's able to do that, but also we have a very, very viable path. Post-convention, we've got to get on the ballot through the convention. But then after that, April 27th convention, there will be a primary because there are some folks in this race that are gathering signatures and they're throwing gobs of money at it.
Gobs and gobs of money. Millions of dollars.
Yeah, we've had one candidate that's already spent over $1.5 million. Just unbelievable.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that.
Now it's
well, I mean, and that's where, thinking of like what are some of the tools, some of the levers that we can pull that levels the playing field to where this established, where money isn't driving why people vote, right? Because they just maybe not even understand. They're like, well, this is the only or this is the most viable candidate because I see them everywhere and I see all these people.
One of those tools was the caucus convention system. And unfortunately, the Senate Bill 54 was passed back in 2014. I call it the Rhino Protection Act.
Yeah.
And one of the candidates in this race, Brad Wilson, was in the House at that point, supported that piece of legislation. That alone has made these races much more expensive. I mean, back in 2010, when Mike Lee was able to unseat a 3-term incumbent senator, Bob Bennett, with about $200,000. You don't see that today.
Right.
I can get through convention with that amount, but it's going to take millions of dollars to be able to compete in a general primary because these other individuals are buying their way on the ballot.
Yeah.
And just usurping the whole and circumventing the whole caucus convention system. So that was one of the tools that we had to keep it reasonable, that you could have the most informed portion of your
I thought it was weird. So I was listening to Bruce Huff talk about this a little bit and how he was – it was almost like it backfired. It was like the Republican Party is the one who wanted to go this route. Isn't that kind of how it flushed out? Do you know the history on it? I was kind of confused
in the Republican Party. And they, there were some initiatives that were created that, they were called Count My Vote, and they were driving this. And I am confused too. I don't know how.
Like, how do we get there?
A state legislature can dictate to a political party how they are going to nominate their candidates.
This is to me. I was like, I thought the whole point of having the party is the party gets to make the rules, and then the states, you just whoever ends up on the ballot, that's how the state goes forward. So it's a very confusing system. Maybe I should have somebody from the party, a representative of the party for sure, come and talk me through how this makes sense. But
so I think that's one thing. Another way in which we could limit the influence of outside groups, just ban lobbyist contributions and donations. I mean, one of the opponents in this race has gotten, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars from lobbyists.
Yeah.
And that's another point in my contract with Utah. I've got 7 points. We've talked about a few, the term limits, the balanced budget, not paying or not voting for an omnibus bill. Another one is to ban the individual trading of stocks, to ban contributions from lobbyists. And also, I think, and this gets back to one of the other things we were talking about how this self-perpetuating cycle of more and more indebtedness and people just going into office and then jumping out to become a lobbyist and do other things. Kash Patel, who was the chief of staff of the DOD during Trump years and also on the National Security Council, he, in fact, is the one that uncovered with Congressman Devin Nunes the whole Russia hoax. He's endorsed my candidacy. So Kash Patel, Rick Grinnell, honored to have those endorsements. Kash said, Trent, look, there's one thing you should add to that as well, and one piece of legislation I'd like you to push as a senator, and that is for at least a 10-year period of time, you need to ban retiring members of Congress and high-ranking government officials from becoming lobbyists and also from working for defense contractors or other just contractors generally.
Yeah, just government.
That's part of the problem too.
Yeah, because that influence, that it just, Nikki Haley is a prime example
Yes.
of she's a prime example of a product of that exact system. And there's countless others too, though. There's countless others.
Yeah.
It's part of what. Yeah, it's what feeds this big monster that's churning through trillions of dollars.
Too.
Yeah,
it's on my contract with Utah that I will push for that. Definitely, I'll advance some legislation to do just that, because I think it's what's destroying our country.
Do you think there's like a viable route? Now, you know, I'm hopeful, obviously, for change like this, but do you think there's a viable route for getting us out of this $35 trillion deficit without raising taxes?
Yeah, I do. I don't want to see the 2017 tax cuts under Trump sunset in 25. I want to keep those going. Look, we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. And I've been saying that time and time again. You referenced the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, when you got this cabal of central bankers and government people just destroy people's wealth through inflation.
Over and over again. They've done it for hundreds of years.
So in 1913, right, when the income tax was instituted in the Federal Reserve, in that 110 plus years, 111 years, did you realize that the income tax back then, I love sharing this with people, and it changes because of inflation, but when I looked last year, the first $91,000 of today's money, 91 grand back then, you paid zero income tax. And the top marginal rate was 7%. And you only paid that if you made the equivalent of $15 million today.
Whoa.
That's insane.
That's insane.
How much are we paying right now in federal tax? Most people, 25 plus percent, 30%.
Yeah. You're baseline. You're at a minimum. You're at 15 to 20% at a minimum.
So what happened in those 110 plus years? It's the government has taken on far too much. And so I'm prepared to go there. Department of Education is one thing that I call out. They got $184 billion in this fiscal year. Get rid of the Department of Education. Let's stop talking
Even
about
the state of Utah. I was surprised when I was looking at the budget in the state of Utah, how much is being spent in higher education too. This is like at the college level. I'm like, wait a minute. Why is the state so invested at the college level? It doesn't make sense to me.
No.
It doesn't make sense.
And we've got we're there on the federal budget. There's several other areas where you can cut. I signed the tax pledge with Americans for Tax Reform. Grover Norquist. I was back in D.C. A few months back. I signed that pledge, committed not to raise taxes. I've never done it in my community. I've always innovated to lower the cost of government and actually cut property taxes in my city. So it can be done. It's going to take some backbone. We talked about one thing in particular. He said, did you know there are 200,000 plus clerical administrative type employees in the Department of Defense that if you cut them out, it would have zero impact to national security?
I can believe that. I really can. Wow.
So 200,000 people, if we got rid of them, how much more money would we have that would free up in our budget? Maybe you even give some of that to our servicemen and women that deserve more money, right? We could do something else with that. But we have many governmental agencies too that are duplicative. Vivek Ramaswamy talked about the FBI and just getting rid of it because half the agents don't do anything anyway. The other half can be folded into other federal agencies that are duplicative. There's so much of that that's going on right now. I firmly believe it. Well, like
I can't help but think of John C. Maxwell. There's a book called The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And one of the key things that you'll see in almost every business where a new CEO comes in, especially when it comes from like a founder to this long-term CEO, which happens a lot of times, is that they completely wipe out the leadership, right? It's not that the leadership is bad. And even the Jazz, this is a great example would be the Jazz, is when the Jazz was bought, when they were bought, all of the executive leadership turned over, right? And that's not what happens in the government. When we get new leadership, there's some appointed pieces that change over, but the biggest decision makers are these entrenched bureaucrats that never change. And just by putting a new human in there, right? That probably has the same skills as the person who's in there now, but is just looking at it from a fresh perspective with a new vision to drive forward. It would change so much. It's crazy to me that we've done this to ourselves.
Yeah, we've got to be able to do that. We've got to be able to terminate people. I mean, President Trump should have the ability to just fire everybody and go hire somebody new in his administration. I think
he talks in one of his interviews about how one of his mistakes, his admitted mistakes, was that he's like, I just didn't know who to trust and who I should replace, right? And I think looking back, he probably would say, I would have just started fresh from, everybody. I didn't not listen to anybody and just said, I'm going to put a whole new,
That's why I had somebody in Cedar City. I was down here last week, and they said to me, you know what? Do me a favor. When you get into office, just hire all new staff, because what happens, and get them from the outside. So they have that different perspective they're coming in with, because far too often what happens is these representatives get in and they've got their staff and they're led by their staff instead of the other way around.
Right.
You're the elected representative. And I get so tired of that too. I serve on a bunch of different boards as a mayor, and far too often I participate in what I call bobblehead boards. They're just, we got to listen and defer to the staff, to the experts. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. You are the ones elected. You're the ones that should be driving policy. You lean on these folks to execute that policy, but it comes from you. You can't just sit there. And so that's what I think we need to have happen too. In as much as I believe in term limits, I think also for the staff that's there, we need fresh perspective and fresh looks to be able to confront the $34 trillion in debt and the many other challenges that we have.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. I think I agree. I was thinking about Yellowstone and when he takes over as the governor of Montana. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. But so he takes over and he's got this handler, right? And I call them handlers. Like and a lot of the politicians that I've interviewed and seen, they always have like this one person that's kind of like the handler. And it sounds derogatory, but she's trying to tell him he has to go here and here, and he's like, why? He's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And it's like, what are they meeting about? And she's like, oh, well, they're setting all these policies for all this stuff. He's like, what do you mean? And he goes in there and sits down. He's like, nope, you're all fired. And they all looked around like, really? Yeah, you're fired. See ya. We'll be just fine without you. It's just, that kind of, that's a ballsy way of doing things. It doesn't work like that. But in the business world, it does. Right. And that's the crazy thing, is that we operate, under these set of rules when it's in a business, but in the government, there's this weird, strange rule set that is being operated by. It's odd to me. The deeper you get into it, it's so strange.
Yeah, that's why I think it should almost be a prerequisite. You've got somebody who's led something, right? Run a business, had to run a payroll like I have before we come into government, because I've taken that approach municipally, right, in our city, and we need that at the federal level more than anything. And I think, getting away from county-led services, bringing them to the city, closer to the people, it's less expensive, higher level of service. It doesn't make sense on the business side, right? There should be shared administrative cost. It should be accretive as you roll up businesses. That doesn't happen in government. And I think the reason why is because, Ronald Reagan said it best. He said, the closest thing that we will experience the eternal life on this earth is a government bureau. Yeah. Right? No government voluntarily reduces itself in size, he would say. Right. And we need that. We need that whole new perspective.
Something you said, you talked about term limits. Help me understand your thought process of what's the limit for you? What's the limit?
Well, the pledge that I've signed is 2 terms for a Senate, 3 terms for a House. So that's conditioned on the fact that we actually pass it, right? Because I know that Senator Lee has espoused the same thing, and him or Senator Cruz will always put forth something on term limits, and it never gets passed by their colleagues, right? So,
there's this weird argument, though, that it is doing the opposite of what we think it does. Have you heard that argument where it's like, well, if you give a term limit, the thought would be that they would act differently, but once they get in, they realize, oh, well, if I give myself a term limit, I can't do all of the things that I want to do. So now I can't act in getting these things accomplished. So I need more time to be able to, say and do the things that I'm planning on doing. So it's almost like they're putting themselves in a box that they can't get out of. Do you think maybe that's why, or do you think it's just the system itself can't decide how to limit its own existence?
It's people don't want to put a limit on themselves. They don't want to stop, this power train that they're on. Yeah, that's it. And I think term limits are 80 to 90%. I think support across the board. Republican, Democrat, whatever. People have that level of support, and they recognize that's probably needed. I know some I talked with say, well, look, it shouldn't be. We, the voters, we, the people, should be the term limits, right? And I agree with that. We should be able to vote people out. The system, though, that's been created, and with all of this money PAC money and corporate interest and other things, it makes it very, very difficult to ever unseat an incumbent.
Yeah, I think an incumbent, so they win like 80+% of the time. And I joked about this before. I was like, man, if that's a sports team, if there's ability to bet a line on it, that's the biggest money generator. That's as stacked of a deck as you can even get. It's crazy to me that that's the way that it comes down. So 2 term limits as a senator, three on the House. So I kind of understand why. What started the political run that you've been on? Why did you decide to do this?
That's a great question. And really, it's something that I go back to my kids. I started out in city government because I started attending some city council meetings. There were some issues in our neighborhood, my wife and I, and we thought, well, let's go to the city council. Go there, love the people that were up on the dais, but I thought, my background in business is a little unique. Our taxes are going up. I think we need somebody there with some business experience. And so we ran. Got in, and we've been able to make some great changes in this community where I want to live. I want my kids, they're growing up there. I want to be able to call home, right? That area. So we wanted to be able to better our own community. We did that, and self-imposing term limits. I thought, term in the council, 2 terms as mayor. Do I just go back to the business world, or is there a broader constituency that I can serve? And it was this race, the Senate race, that kept coming up. Just the dire condition in which we're in. You go to my launch video, I call out Mitt Romney and the promises he made back in 2018 when he said that he would fight for us every day, that he'd put us on a path to a balanced budget, he'd end illegal immigration, he'd stop federal spending and overreach, and he said he would confirm conservative justices to the court. Record's just the opposite.
Yeah, done everything.
And wasn't really representing. I'm a state delegate in the GOP, doesn't bother to show up to convention. I was asked to chair the Salt Lake County GOP convention last March. Only member of our federal delegation that didn't attend in person or at least produce a video for the 1,200 delegates that were there. And I talked to other mayors, county commissioners. They'd go back to D.C., to visit with federal delegations. And they couldn't get much of any time with Senator Romney's office. And I thought, there's something wrong here. Utah deserves better. Utah deserves somebody who's going to stand up and represent them and fight for them. We deserve another Mike Lee.
Yeah.
And so that's why back in May, my wife and I made the commitment, the decision to run. And it's been fantastic to be able to go all across the state, visit people that I otherwise never would have, and just keep building support. National endorsements, to be endorsed by Mark Levin and Charlie Kirk and Kerry Lake, Senator Tommy Tuberville, Rick Grinnell, Kash Patel. I've got the Utah Fraternal Order of Police. I got Moms for America. I got over 100 local elected officials, mayors, city council members, county commissioners. We've built a great coalition. It's resonating. People realize that we're doing this, I think, for the right reasons. And it's just to go back there and be able to effectuate change and say enough is enough. I think if I had to sum it up in one phrase, why I'm running, it's because, I talked with a good friend about this. I said, it's not on my watch. Not on my watch. Yeah. I've been blessed. I can do something about it. I had a liquidity event with this company that I took public. I could afford to take a year off and effectively run for office. I'm still mayor, but people ask if I'm paid, if I'm full-time or part-time. I say I'm all the time as mayor, but I'm paid part-time. So you need other income streams. And so I've taken effectively this last year off, my wife and I, and traversed the state, and we're going for it. We're saying, look, we're there. We're going to be able to champion change. I'm not going there to try to ingratiate myself with the DC culture. I'm not going there to make friends. Mm-hmm. I'm going there to make change because we need it more now than ever. And I've been really, really humbled to get these types of endorsements and know that I can work with these types of great senators and senatorial candidates in a new Trump administration. That's the hope.
What, I know we're running a little thin on time. What have you run into that you didn't anticipate, and what's frustrated you the most around just governing in general, right? From the city council to the mayor to looking ahead, as a senator and what the job's going to entail. What's frustrated you the most about this whole process?
Oh, well, I think to see how we were talking a little bit about it before with the establishment, right? Mm-hmm. There is an establishment in DC there's an establishment in Utah. There's a Utah swamp. There's a DC swamp.
Yeah.
And the extent to which certain people and institutions will go to maintain the status quo is disappointing.
Yeah.
Not unexpected, I guess. People want to have they want to continue business operating the same way. They want to try to develop their own monopolies or oligopolies in a way. But, what we need now more than ever is somebody who's demonstrated that backbone, stood up to the establishment and said, no, we're going to take everything on. And that's what we've done.
Yeah, that battle's been one that it's one thing to know it and see that it's there, but then to see it as a human form, right? Like you learn the personality type, you have conversations with them and you see them show up one way. And then when it comes to voting or when it actually, the rubber meets the road, running into that opposite, I've seen that quite a bit. And that it's very frustrating.
There's some real entrenched interest here
to see it.
And, but the thing that I'm encouraged by is as I go out and meet all these people, we've got some great patriots all throughout the state and people that are willing to stand up and support. And the level of support that we've received is just, it's amazing. It's remarkable. And I think we're going to build on that. We'll go into convention, win the convention, and then be able to win in the primary and become the next U.S. Senator here.
Yeah, I'm excited.
It's going to be with we the people. It's going to be the people. We're truly a grassroots-led effort. I'm not part of the establishment.
Yeah.
There are other people in this race that if you want another Mitt Romney, another Romney 2.0, somebody who's part of the establishment being backed and supported by establishment donors, that's not me.
Yeah.
There are other candidates in this race, but we're at a very, very important time, a crucial time. We need somebody who's going to stand up to that, not just here, but back in DC.
Man, I'm excited to see how that turns out. I'm really grateful that you came and sat down and talked to me like this in this kind of a format too. I think a lot of people think that there's this bridge that they can't connect with their local representatives. And I've seen you go from place to place, giving me the time I think is awesome. You're a genuine guy. I can definitely feel it across the table. And I want to wish you the best of luck, man. I definitely, I think you'd be a great representative for us. So,
well, thank you.
I appreciate you on here. I'm looking forward to having another conversation with you in a couple of months to see how things are progressing. But you got other stuff to get to. Good luck. And TrentStaggs.com, right?
That's it.
TrentStaggs.com to find out more, to donate, to volunteer. We need more people to stand up and say they've had enough. They got to get involved. We got to get involved. And the runway, the timeline is rapidly approaching.
It is. We need people to stand up. I'm the Caucus convention system only, so we're encouraging people to go to their neighborhood precinct March 5th, run to be a state delegate and support us.
Yep.
Your commitment to become a state delegate is April 27th at the Salt Palace in Salt Lake City. There's an all-day, convention where you'll vote on not just the U.S. Senate candidate, but, the statewide offices too, like the governor's race and attorney general and others. There's about a half a dozen races that a state delegate would vote for.
Where can they go if you're like, I'm curious about the delegate process, or like, I want to be a delegate? Where do they go? Is there a website to go? Do they go to... is there somewhere that they can go to find out more information about that?
We're happy to do that at TrentStaggs.com. There's a volunteer link. You can go there. Or the GOP, the state GOP, has a website called PrecinctPortal.org. And at PrecinctPortal.org, you can enter your address and you can see where, like what precinct you're in. Mm-hmm. And they should be loading in now the caucus locations.
Okay.
And
sweet.
where you're going to caucus March 5th. And so we need people to come out that want to have somebody that's representing them, that's going to stand up like another Mike Lee. If that's who you are, go to caucus that night, pledge to, run, support me.
Yeah. I love it. Thanks for the help, man. Appreciate it.
Thank
Good
you.
luck in your interview. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Thank
man?
you.
Thanks.